Hello everyone, I'm Darcy Bono, and in this video I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily paint the classic color scheme for one of my favorite armies of all time in any of the worlds of Warhammer, the Ironjawz. I absolutely love these guys. I started back into the hobby with them in 2018 with this icy color scheme. They are amazing models, especially for beginners, just because they're nice and big and chunky and you don't have to worry about breaking anything. There will be a video in the future on my Icejaws, however, I just wanted to show how easy it is to paint the classic yellow and black armor, so let's get started. Now, my love for the Ironjawz is so intense that GW did not send me the new series due to the amount of WA energy I would generate from that, so that was just going to be too much of a liability. So I have this old model here that I bought secondhand. If you see any overglued areas, just scream in horror and move past it. For better visibility, I've removed the big gore choppa that is his giant weapon in front of his torso, just so you can see a little bit better, and he is primed using white scar spray. Make sure whatever primer you're using is a very vibrant white in order to keep the subsequent layers of yellow nice and saturated. Our very first step is to block out anything that's going to be black armor or a metallic surface using black Templar. You can really use any black you like, but because I'm going to be painting the black armor with contrast paints, we're going to use black Templar for this. The reason we're doing our black and metallic surfaces first is because it's just much easier to correct any potential mistakes in the future. If you get yellow paint on your black, it's not going to show up very much, and it's going to be very easy to correct as opposed to the opposite of that. So save your lightest surfaces, in this case yellow, for last. Another quick tip, if you plan on doing any markings on your armor, the Ironjawz are known for a jagged flame pattern and any teeth iconography, make those markings before you paint your yellow armor. And it's for the exact same reason I mentioned. It's a lot easier to correct this now when you're working with just a flat white surface compared to if you had a nicely shaded painted yellow on this. It would take a lot more to touch it up. I recommend Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. It is exceptionally smooth and opaque for a white paint and goes over black very easily. And ironically, I was satisfied with how my markings turned out the first time, so I didn't end up using it in this case, but I always keep it on hand just in case I need to touch anything up. And again, just to clarify, anywhere that's going to be metal, also put down your black Templar as well. The reason being is because we're going to be stippling over this to create a rugged metallic effect. So any surface that's going to be the traditional Ironjawz pig iron, paint that black first, let it dry, and you can move on to the fun part. In order to create our rugged metal surface, I'm going to be stippling and dry brushing using a bright silver. In this case, I'm using Vallejo Game Air Silver, but any bright silver will work. Necron Compound is a dry brush paint that Citadel makes that's also a good option for this. And I'm going to be applying this using an e.l.f. smudge brush. This is a makeup brush used for smudging eyeshadow, but due to its rounded tip, it's also really great for stippling as it creates a nice speckled pattern when you lightly pat the miniature. If you've never done stippling before, it's very, very similar to dry brushing. Get most of the paint off your brush and then lightly pat the surface of your miniature until you build up layers of this speckled pattern. In addition to stippling, you can always just give your metallic surfaces a basic heavy dry brush. It'll give you an equally rugged look to your armor and weapons. So really nothing to this. I'm just dry brushing this silver over top this black surface, slowly building up the layers of it until I'm satisfied. And if you want to further enhance the texture on your metallic surfaces, feel free to give a sparing edge highlight using the exact same silver you've been using. Again, this is Vallejo Game Air Silver. I'm just picking out some of the striations here and there so that when I apply my contrast paints in the next step, these edges still appear relatively bright. I've changed the background so you can better see the color variation in this. In order to make this look like a nice orky weathered metal, you have several options to choose from. Option A is using 1 drop of Black Legion contrast and 3 drops of contrast medium. Black Legion contrast is very opaque, very dense, but it's also a warm black, meaning it has a lot of brown in it. So just by diluting the heck out of it, you automatically get a nice, rugged, weathered metal color. Now keep in mind the results of this are going to vary by how much you built up your silver in the previous step. So as you can see here, this is substantially brighter than the back of the blade is. Therefore, this is going to look a little bit brighter after I apply my glaze. Another option you have to create a more brown metal surface, just mix 1 drop of Ratling Grime with 2 drops of contrast medium and apply it over your silver. And finally, my preferred way of weathering metal is actually making a mixture of 3 drops Black Templar contrast and a single drop of Wyldwood with 3 drops of contrast medium to make it nice and transparent. What this does is it gives you the best of both worlds. You end up with something that looks very similar to Black Legion when you first apply it. However, you can flavor it to taste. You can work in more Wyldwood if you want something like a more intense Ratling Grime, a more intense brown metallic. And the reason I'm suggesting this is because we're already incorporating these 2 paints into the color scheme. You technically don't need to buy Ratling Grime or Black Legion if you have Wyldwood and Black Templar. We've already used Black Templar on our armor, and we're going to be using Wyldwood to do our chipping on the armor later. But if you don't want to worry about color mixing, the previous paints I've shown are a great way to get a rugged iron look. So for one last optional highlight, you can actually mix the silver that you use to do your stippling with any of the 3 shades that I mentioned for tinting this into an iron color. Mix it with any of those and you'll get a warm metallic highlight. You don't need to go out and buy Iron Hand Steel or Lead Belcher. Just use what you already have to highlight the edges of this sparingly, maybe add a few more striations if things got a bit too dark. And there's no particular ratio to this, just take the tip of your paintbrush and just take the lightest speck of your brown-black mixture and mix it into your silver until it's a warmer silver. Now that our metal is completely finished, we'll go back and highlight our black armor. Now, as you may have recalled, we applied Black Templar straight from the pot. It's a contrast paint. It looks great over textured surfaces, so if you want to skip this step, that's totally fine. We're just going to be adding a highlight to pick out the edges a little bit more. To make this highlight, we're once again using what we already have on our paint list. There is a dollop of white paint here along with a dollop of Black Templar. Black Templar is a cold kind of greenish black, and when you add white to it, it becomes a cold greenish gray. That's all we're going to do to pick out the edges, is just add a little bit of white into this black. There's honestly no ratio to this. I'm just adding a speck at a time until I get to a mid-tone bluish greenish gray. So really not much to this. I'm just applying a standard edge highlight across the sharpest edges of the armor. I'm not going into the center hardly at all because the Black Templar has already done a pretty good job as far as picking out the texture there. So just run this along the sharpest edges. And you can make even crisper edges by another layer of highlighting, which you can do easily just by adding the tiniest speck of white to your already mid-tone gray mix. And now it is a lighter gray. So just do that very sparingly again on some of the sharper edges like you see here on his knee pad, and it just gives it a little bit more definition. So here it is, the moment we've all been waiting for, the iconic Ironjawz yellow. Now, if you are familiar with my channel, I paint yellow quite a lot because it's actually insanely easy with contrast paints. Mix an even ratio of Nazdreg Yellow and contrast medium, and then apply that to where you want your yellow armor. When thinned, Nazdreg Yellow is this rich, intense golden yellow. It's one of the traditional yellow contrast paints, so it's great at picking out the textured surfaces. However, if you oversaturate the armor, like I did here, in order to avoid these overly darkened recesses, just rinse your brush and kind of soak up some of that yellow out of it. The contrast medium extends the drying time, so you're able to do this without it coming up in patches, and just allows you to spread the paint more smoothly. Now, I'm frequently asked, can I use a different color yellow? Can I use, Ironjawz yellow? Wouldn't that be appropriate? Well, honestly, you can, sure. It's just not going to look like this. Ironjawz yellow is a very, lemon yellow. It just doesn't look anywhere near close to how the box art for the Ironjawz armor looks. So I prefer Nazdreg Yellow just because it's a very intense yellow that spreads nicely and isn't quite as transparent as some of the other yellows in the contrast range. And unlike Imperial Fist Yellow, which I also love due to its intensity. I have a link in the video description if you want to see how good that looks on Imperial Fist armor. But unlike Imperial Fist Yellow, Nazdreg Yellow actually picks out the texture of the armor rather than just providing a flat, opaque yellow surface. So initially I was just going to show you how to do the basic yellow on the armor and not show any kind of weathering. However, it's the Ironjawz. I figured I should at least show you chipping, so I had a change of heart, but it already painted the miniature in its entirety. So ignore all the other lovely colors on here and focus on the yellow. I'm going to show you how to chip the yellow to make it look nice and orky. So what we're going to do is apply a chipping highlight. This is Dorn Yellow, and all I'm doing is applying it with a simple sponge. What you do is just dip the sponge in the paint, get most of the paint off, make sure to test it on another surface that's not your miniature so you know what your pattern's going to look like, and then lightly sponge the Dorn Yellow highlight onto the edges and onto some portions of the center of the armor. Don't do it all over it. Less is more when you've got this much texture on your model already. You can also apply Dorn Yellow as a traditional edge highlight anywhere that you want to add a little bit more definition. You can use it to outline where any scratches are going to be. Just applying it with the sponge creates a little bit more of a natural, irregular pattern, while applying it with the brush allows you to pick what you want your shapes and scratches to look like. So personally for me, I don't like a ton of weathering. I'm just doing this very sparingly along the edges, here and there, not doing every single edge. And using the exact same sponging technique that you used with the Dorn Yellow, you're then going to repeat that process, but this time using undiluted Wyldwood contrast. This is going to create the illusion of a chipped surface due to the yellow highlight we placed beforehand. So focus this in areas where you have applied your Dorn Yellow. By placing this over top of that bright highlight, you create a deep shadow, which then gives you texture. That's what gives this a weathered look. So just lightly blot this around, again focusing on areas where there's Dorn Yellow. So again, using a tiny detail brush, run this not quite over your yellow highlight. You want a thin border of your yellow highlight showing through so you get the illusion of definition. You can also do this anywhere on the armor where it would be a little bit harder to reach with the sponge. So that is how to paint and very basically weather the Ironjawz yellow armor. If you'd like to see how I did the green skin on this miniature, stay tuned. We're going to go back in time and see how I did that. The yellow just won't be looking the way it currently does. Keep in mind, this is a very basic two-step process for this skin tone. If you'd like to see something slightly more advanced but still beginner friendly, I already have a video on how I prefer to paint my orc skin. I'll list the link in the video description, but if you'd like to see specifically how I did it for this miniature, stick around. All I did to paint the skin was mix 2 drops of Gutrippa Flesh contrast with 1 drop of contrast medium and apply it to the miniature. Whenever you're working with larger, smoother surfaces like his back muscles here, work in small patches and spread the paint around evenly. You don't want to oversaturate it because that's when you get the splotches that contrast paint is somewhat infamous for. To add a bit more definition to the flesh, I'm using Gryphcharger Grey and contrast medium mixed in an even ratio to make a recess shade. So all I'm doing is applying this anywhere there's going to be a more intense shadow in order to create a bit more contrast. So that is it when it comes to painting the main components for the Ironjawz. Now there are quite a few little details left, all of which are very easy to take care of, and I thought would be really tedious for everyone involved if I showed shot by shot how I did each tinier component. So here is a recipe card with all the colors I used for the smaller portions of the model. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned a few things. I understand that tabletop standard can be kind of underwhelming for some people, but for other people, especially who are new to painting, I thought this tutorial could be helpful in showing you just how easy it is to paint something to a presentable standard with limited paints and very little effort. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things to please the algorithm gods. If you really enjoyed this video and want to help support the future growth of this channel, you can contribute to my Ko-fi link in the video description. It basically functions as a digital tip jar, or you can click the super thanks button on YouTube to send me a tip as well. So that being said, thanks so much for joining me today, and until we meet again, happy painting everyone!